So for this project you're going to need 4 of these squares from the Autumn Sets In series. So there's a squirrel, a rabbit, a fox and a hedgehog, and you want to cut them out so that there's around the outside there's always a 1/4 inch of a slightly different colour, so that is mainly so that I make sure that I'm giving you enough seam allowance, but that is exactly 1/4 inch. So we want to sew together, try and remember which way we were going to do them. The squirrel, nope, not the squirrel, right, just a second. I've worked it out now. Right, we want to sew together the squirrel and the fox. So just straight stitching and just over a 1/4 inch, so that we're making sure that we don't get any of that lighter pink showing. So we're just sewing it along that seam. Next we're going to take the squirrel and the hedgehog and then sew them together again down this seam with just over the 1/4 inch seam allowance to make sure you got rid of all of the edges. Okay, and then press them so that one set goes with seam this way and the other goes with that way, so that when we put these together, so the rabbits are going on the bottom, fox at the top, the squirrel at the top, we can then nest these seams here, you see, which I'm going to bring it in. Where's, I'm trying to work out where the camera is. Here we are. So like that. Okay, so we'll just sew those seams together. Okay, so that's it all pressed, so hopefully you've got a reasonably good match in the middle there, and I've given it all a good press because some of the blocks, by the time you got them in the post, they've got a little creased, so press them all, and then we're just going to baste this up. Now obviously if you like you could add in some extra patchwork or put a border on it, but I'm just going for a nice quick and easy project. So next I've got this sandwiched up, so I've used a coordinating purple on the back, but this is going to be a wall hanging, so no one's going to see it anyway, but I just happen to have a lot of that fabric, so why not. And then I've used a Hobbs polyester wadding because it's nice and soft and it's got a nice loft to it. So with everything layered up, I'm now just going to thread baste it. Baste however where you want, but baste thoroughly. So it's not the time to, it's not a very big project, so we don't need to skimp on making sure it's secure. I don't like using pins unless it's small, mainly because I stab myself a lot and they can slip, but you can use sprays, although they just seem horrendously messy and sticky to me. But and you always start from the middle and work your way out, and you can always slip your hand kind of underneath and just check that you're not getting a crease in or anything like that, and then just work your way radially outwards until it's all secure. Right, and so that's it all together, all nicely basted, and it does look a lot of thread basting, but it is worth it. And if you look at the back, it should all be nice and flat, no tucks, and oh, look at that, check you haven't got anything like that. I just need to undo this one here. There we go. And then nothing can slip, it's all going to stay exactly and where it's supposed to be, and you've got a much less chance of getting tucks and fullness in the wrong place. And it doesn't take that long. If you're working on a bigger quilt and you're basting up, just do it in stages, put it away and come back and have another go if it's too much to do it all in one go. But don't skimp on the basting because, you know, it's too long a job. The quilt took you such a long, well, this one didn't, but normally a quilt takes you an awful long time to do, so it's not worth not putting the effort in to baste it up properly. Right, so I'm all set up for free motion sewing. So it depends on how your machine does. Mine's just computerized, and I just click the button which says free motion, which makes it a lot easier. And I've put my free motion foot on. I'm using a darning foot rather than an actual free motion foot, and it depends on how your machine is. Some of them have a little slider switch that's on the side of the machine there, and that drops the feed dogs. Others have something which specifically says, you know, to drop the feed dogs. You just need to look up in your manual how yours does it. Most of them do have the ability to drop the feed dogs. I've had machines for like £100, you know, and they've all been able to do it. So it's not like it's only the fancy ones that can do them. So I'm thread my machine up in a variegated rayon thread in a kind of plum colour to match the background. And I'm not going to be doing a particularly complicated pattern. I'm just going to be doing I'm just going to see if I can find a pencil. I'm just going to be doing 2 kind of tear shaped loops for the majority of it, because I did something similar on this on just a 1 block, and I'd just like to get the same effect on a bigger one. So we're going to work around, so I'll get going rather than just chatting. And so I'm going to do a loop, so a tier, and with your pointy scissors just cut that. Oh, that's not the right thread. Just pulled the wrong one. Let's just pull that one back. Was it the right one? Oh no, it was the right one. Right, I think. Yes, it was just very long thread. Right, so we're just going to cut that short so that I'm not going to keep on sewing over it. And then if you can make it so that your machine finishes with the needle down, then you can take a break without having any worries about moving it. There we go. So I'm just doing 2 together. So I think on the last quilting video I did 3, but 2's fine for this one. And the advantage of doing this is that you can choose which direction you want to go. So if you do your first loop, so like that, and then on the second loop you can decide if you want to head this way, then make the last loop in the direction you want to go. And then if you're reaching something else which doesn't allow you to go to the bottom of the teardrop, you're in the right direction. It'll probably become more obvious, whereas the first loop doesn't matter which way you do, really. And we're not going to quilt onto the actual animals. I'm just trying to check I'm not going to quilt on him there. And if you need to move to a different area, just go on and one of the stitches that you've already done. You don't have to go back in a different way. I used to kind of panic about that a lot, and it really, you can't see, once it's all finished, you really can't see where you've gone over it a second time. So you don't have to keep the loops the same size. We can have some bigger, some smaller, but we're just going to work from the centre of the quilt, or near on the centre of the quilt. So on that one, I don't know if you can see there, I didn't bother going all the way to the back because I'd reached here and it seemed a good place just to turn back at that point. So we're just going to go around this leaf and the bottom of my hedgehog. It's easier while you can do your free motion turning in any direction. It is easier if you can see where you're going. So it can be helpful to turn it down. It's easier to sew towards yourself, or at least it's easier to see what you're doing towards yourself. So I'm just going to whiz down him a little bit, and then I'm going to go back up. And then that also stops all of these loops ending up being kind of just tracking each other, because that one's turned in a different way than you would have expected it to. So here I'm starting to get into the leaves. So I'm just going to kind of carry, so here it should have gone into this loop, and I've just kind of cropped those bits off and followed the shape of the acorns. Later we're going to go around and decorate these a little bit with some variegated thread, so I don't need to worry too much about any of those. So I'm going to go back in and just finish this little bit in the hedgehog, and then I'm going to work, I think I'm going to come to about here, and then I'm going to work back in towards the centre, so that I don't end up, well, you've got to get back to the centre at some point because we've got all the rest of the centre to do, so it doesn't matter too much. But so I'll speed the next section of the video up because otherwise it'll take forever on the video. But I'm not sewing as fast as the next section would suggest. Now here you can see I've got this little gap here, so sometimes you've got to decide whether that gap feels too big for you, or if you want you could go in. So I think I'm going to go in here, and I'm just going to put a little loop in, and then I'm going to take the advantage. Actually, I'll just sew the double one, and then I'm going to take the advantage of working my way back up here. Okay, see, and then that looks quite cute there with those two little ones in there. And now, having nearly reached the middle, I'm going to go back and fill in this section. And we're still not going over, we're only working the background areas, so it's just the purple areas. Another point here is how I've gone back. It's kind of left me with a narrow section, and so I can, if I want, I could make a tier which comes out and is very thin, but it means you've got this big long tier with your kind of more the blobby circular bit at the end. So instead what you can do is just run down the previous shape and then spur off that, which is another good way of if you want to try and change direction, because otherwise if you always go in between them then you end up kind of just going outwards. Whereas if you come along here, I can now go down the side of it, say, and then head off at like perpendicular, so you could change direction. And we're not doing the big feathers, so kind of random looks better.